Now, what I love to do, and this is a great trick to create community and basically maintain credibility, at the end of each episode, I say, we're all pioneering healthcare, whoever my guest is, who would you like to nominate that is making waves in the space that you think should hop onto the podcast to share their insights?
This is Recorded Content, a podcast for small, scrappy B2B marketing teams who want to get the most out of podcasting. In each episode, we'll explore how podcasting can drive your company's content strategy, build brand awareness, and help you connect with your ideal customers. Let's get to it.
Hey, this is Ben. I'm the Managing Director of Podcasting at Motion and your host for this episode of Recorded Content. Recorded Content is brought to you by Motion, a done-for-you podcast agency for small, scrappy B2B tech marketers. And today I have Liat Kozuch on, the field marketing manager for Hyro and the host of their podcast, Patient Journey Pioneers. So Liat was faced with something that we're seeing a lot of these days, and she came to us, Motion, about helping with her podcast. So as I understand it, Liat really wanted to work with us, an agency that would take care of a lot of the legwork, but in the current economic climate, like many marketers are experiencing, she was asked to wear another hat instead of using an agency or getting headcount. So fast forward to today, Liat's, figured it out. She's built and launched a video podcast on her own. She handles everything from the hosting of the show and the guest outreach to the actual creation of the assets and delivery of the podcast. And with that, I'd like to welcome Liat to the show. Liat, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I want to start at the beginning because, you went through a lot of what we're seeing, which, there are marketers all over the planet that want to start, initiatives and are being told that either their company isn't going to do it or, you can figure out how to do it essentially with, little to no budget. So in this case, that's something that's sort of happened to you, and I'll kind of let you explain, but what was it like when you realized, you were going to be the one creating the show and not using an agency?
For sure. So it was definitely an ambitious goal to have. And just like you mentioned in your intro, scrappy is definitely the word, I gotta say, until, you get your stuff together and you start to learn. But in the beginning, it was my manager, Aaron, who is very ambitious and has a lot of goals in mind. We were at a conference and he said, we need to start a podcast. We just have to do it. And I was actually falling in love with Hyro just in general as a company. And I love representing things I love out to the world. And so what better than to be in field marketing at conferences, face-to-face with prospects, partners, clients, and then to add the podcast to my plate, which is quite its own plate, to be honest, as you guys probably know. But so we were at this conference and he said, this is the time. And so Hyro is at a place where we were very much in the ecosystem, creating buzz with partnership announcements, having these booths at these events. Customer success stories were like across the board. We had some awesome champions we were working with, and what better way than to provide them with a stage to share their stories. But it wasn't from like a salesy point of view. It was really to place Hyro as a thought leader in the space. And we specifically are in conversational AI-powered assistance, mainly in healthcare. And so that's kind of where the idea came up. We were at the right place at the right time. Obviously, I spoke to Motion. We'll get into that. But that's how it all started. It was kind of like finding that one person in the organization who's already kind of all about organization and project management and being very resourceful, which is something you need when you're starting a podcast. And I went from there. The funny story is we were at a conference and at our booth, and he had mentioned this one guy named Ed Marks, who's like the superstar in healthcare. It would be awesome if he were to jump on the podcast. I didn't even have a title or a platform that I'd be using yet, but he's like, we need to get this guy. And I'm not a shy person, so I'm like, let's do it. I believe in Hyro. I believe in myself. Let's try. I look up and I see this same Ed Marks guy 5 booths down the hall. And I'm like, oh my God, that's him. And he was doing a book signing. And I was like, you know what? This is, there's nothing like face-to-face interaction. Let's stand online and try to meet him. So I stand online with his book waiting to get signed. And then come my turn and I'm like, hi, you don't know me. We're Hyro. And he's like, oh yeah, I know Hyro. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. I know you hear this a lot. You're a superstar. It would be great if you'd hop on our podcast all about innovation in healthcare. What do you say? And I'm like shaking in my pants. And he goes, yeah, just message me on LinkedIn. I'd love to. And that's just one pointer for people looking to start podcasts is it's quite easy to get people to hop on. People like that spotlight. They like to share their insights with the community. And so what better way? So he was my first guest and I was very happy to kind of go from there.
Wow, that's awesome. So you just went right up and got in line and just, took the shot right then and there, huh?
Yeah, for sure. I built the
That's
plane
awesome.
as it took off.
That's awesome. So I guess, kind of talking about those first steps or expanding on that a little bit more, what were some of those first steps that you took to learn about the medium and, how you're actually going to execute?
So, first of all, I was very tempted to use motion, and we'll get to that in a sec because still think it's a luxury and a dream for those who have the budget and the ability to have motion on board. I think it's a huge addition. Like I just recently got promoted and now I have another person on my team and luckily they're helping me with like the small podcasty, management stuff. But till now I was really a one person show. So I have to say that we cannot belittle the amount of time that, maintaining a podcast takes. So to go back to your question, how I started was basically reading a lot on Google. I used to work with a lot of people who are creative. So one of them was an expert in podcasting. And I just said, would you take 15 minutes to talk to me about what it really means to set up the studio, all the way to the editing platform, all the way to speaker outreach, all the way to how do I organize my episode workflow. And yeah, started creating a Google sheet called my PJP episode tracker, chose my platform, chose my editing software, discovered Descript. We'll get into those tools. But yeah, it's kind of like a work as you go
Yeah,
progress.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. So I mean, really going back to that organizational piece. I mean, that's such a tough piece of this too, especially when you're asked to wear a bunch of different hats. I mean, the only way that you can kind of stay afloat, obviously, is making sure that you're organized and that you've kind of got, one view of everything. You've got a workflow, you've got your process all laid out. So, let's talk about that because you mentioned it a few times with coming to motion. So what was your I guess kind of what led you to us and what was kind of your hope there? I know obviously, as you're being asked to start up this podcast, I'm sure you're sitting there thinking, okay, well, how am I actually going to find the resources to do this? So, I guess what did that conversation look like and what was kind of the leading factor for you, to look for an agency specifically to kind of help out with the podcasting?
Yeah, so I believe Justin had already
Yep.
spoke to my manager and they were talking about repurposing. A big, big deal that I find with motion and a big benefit is the repurposing aspect because that's a whole new island of management you have to take over once you're done recording an episode and, turning that into a blog post, LinkedIn post, little snippets. Like I'm doing that manually still through Descript. But going back, I had a call with Justin and basically I was just building our field marketing department. So I didn't really have a budget yet for our in-person events, virtual events, the podcast. It was really just like dabbling with how Justin could help and it like ooh and awed me. But I knew that I had to start it on my own at first, kind of maybe prove the concept and then hopefully down the line I'd be using motion as my agency and I still, I'm still dreaming of it and it's still something on my list because it's a very big like additional benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. And trust me, so are we. We're definitely true about it. But you kind of mentioned the repurposing there, and one of the things you do a great job with is the video side of creating the podcast. So your YouTube episodes, they have chapters and segments. You have nice animated intro with your voiceover. So obviously, how much we love about video and how we think it's the best way for B2B companies to promote their podcasts. But it's also a lot of work, right? So why did you decide to go that video route?
There's a lot of audio out there. I don't think there's as much video. I like to watch video. I like to see people's facial expressions. It's almost like the visual adds a lot to the sound. And I guess it just like I feel comfortable in front of the camera, right? So I feel comfortable making eye contact with my guests and then fostering those relationships, which is another plus of having a podcast. I now have people that I hug at conferences who are my patient journey pioneers. That's our title, but it has a lot of meaning behind it. They're pioneering the way for digital patient journeys. And so that gives them kind of like this star of recognition and it creates this community of like, he's a pioneer. He was a pioneer. He was on the pod. And with sales, it helps with like, oh, this prospect, he actually hopped on the pod last week. Tell him I say hi. It's a great way to foster relationships. So I like the visual aspect. It also gives us a lot of content for repurposing. Even though our audiograms that we now use as teasers that we publish 1 week before an episode goes live is just an audiogram. It doesn't have two speaking faces. I still enjoy watching a YouTube video and seeing their expressions. And also it helps us in repurposing, right? So I created a patient journey pioneers kind of teaser video and it has like all these faces and I do this thumbs up thing at the end of each episode. So you have all this positive energy and thumbs up going on. Yeah, Very useful, more than audio in my opinion. And you could always repurpose video to audio, but once you just have audio, you can't, instill video into that. So it's like having it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you've mentioned using Descript a few times here, but I guess so. As you're starting to get into that video route, kind of what was your experience beforehand, and then how did you kind of, I guess, as you're starting to go down that route and starting to create videos, where did you start, and how did you like land on Descript, and what was that learning process like as you're trying to create these videos, these promo videos, for example, and then you know basically be able to have these different assets that you can, redistribute across, different platforms.
Right. So it would start with setting up the best studio. You would have your studio set up. I'd have the cringeworthy first episodes where my sound was just horrible. I brought someone in to help me with my mic and the lighting and everything. It's not what it looks like here, but it would start with the studio, and it would start with choosing really the platform, which I chose Riverside, just like what we're on right now. I then would, capture the actual body of the episode. It would upload. I would get the raw files, and then I would basically download them into Premiere. And within Premiere, I would just learn on the go how to edit and, cut and make sure the speed is kind of a bit like more up, because I can't hear myself and my own voice when it's a bit too slow. So I like to up the speed. Once I'm done with that, and this is where motion comes in, because it's like I wish I just had that, like, one time of just recording and then like sending it over to some other experts who would do it much better than I do now, I'm sure. But if you're asking about my current situation, then the Premiere, I would edit it in Premiere, export it into an audio and a video file. Then we'd have prepared. And by the way, I'm so lucky to be surrounded by such creative professionals who do not compromise on the quality of our work. Like at first I thought creating podcast artwork was like, okay, a little, square of some logo. No, like my designer is amazing. She was like, no, we're going to talk mountains. We're going to talk what the mountains mean. These mountains in the artwork mean the horizon and the patient journey pioneers and, pioneering the path. And so the artwork really added to it. And the artwork was implemented into an intro clip and an outro clip that I would basically add on to both sides of each episode with some captions in the middle. Once I export that, I then upload it to Descript, which uses AI to create a transcript for me. Until not long ago, I would sit there and watch the actual episode once it's edited to create timestamps for YouTube and for our website. But luckily, we have ChatGPT where you could just, plop that transcript in and then ask it to create a 6-part timestamp for you with even better titles than I could come up with. So that's where we're using AI in our workflow. But again, it's not as easy as having motion, because sometimes ChatGPT is like, nope, that transcript's too long. I can't even work with it. So I would have to cut it in half, take the first part of the transcript, plug it in, get the timestamps, then the second one, and so on and so forth. Descript would also, once it's done creating the transcript, I would have it create an audiogram for me where I would look for the most powerful quote. And that's also where design comes in. We would incorporate that in like a nice framework of design, wrap that audiogram and push it out on LinkedIn, for example, for either a teaser leading up to the episode or the actual episode release. Email assets as well to our subscribers. Blogs, I haven't gotten to that yet. I wish I could. That's something Motion could do for me. But right now I'm a one-man show, so I'm just, dealing with what I can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just, I mean, it's incredible kind of listening to you kind of talk through everything, because there is a lot that goes into it, right? It's not as simple as hitting the record button and again, just kind of letting the thoughts flow and, just letting the conversation fly. There is a lot that actually goes into it on the back end, and just hearing how you've kind of gone through and really figured out every step of the way. I mean, that's a lot to ask of any person who's like, that's their full-time job. And this is, again, for you, it's not your full-time job. It's just
Wow.
another, part of the role. So it is impressive. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit here. I mean,
Thank
I
you.
like I said, we've seen your videos. I mean, your show is great. You've done a great job with it. But going off that, how has it been received, across the organization and leadership?
Yeah, so and back to what you just said, I just want to shout out to all podcasters out there who are basically doing this as kind of like a side thing, because it really is kind of not even all organized for me, right? Like, so even if on Monday.com I found a way to be like, okay, I have so much stuff to do around just one episode, wrapping it up from A to Z, all the way from like the calendar invite to make sure that the guest knows when to hop on, all the way to the thank you email, all the way to making sure that once I'm done recording, I'm writing down my top thoughts, and then making sure that you have a backlog of guests scheduled for the next few episodes, that's not where it ends. You also have to research about the guest before so that you come as like an expert on their background and set up a list of questions that don't sound cookie cutter. So yes, it's a lot, and don't mean to toot my own horn. I'm just here to shout out to everyone who's kind of learning on the fly. And I think there will be more and more services like Motion because you understand how much bandwidth this really takes. And it's almost like a off hours job where like 7 p.m. in the office, that's when I'm kind of starting my whole like hopping on Riverside and interviewing guests and all that stuff. Now, let me go back to your other question with leadership. In an organization, podcasts are huge, especially in B2B. I can't really say especially because I haven't experienced it elsewhere, but in the world of B2B, it's huge. First of all, it helps obviously with relationships. So prospects that our BDRs have been trying to, hunt down, I'm just like, hey, hop on the pod and I have this personal relationship with him or her. And again, we try to keep it not salesy at all. So only if they're interested in Hyro, I pass them off to hear about our solution. But if not, it's just simple, value, education, stuff like that. And then mending that offline experience. So I'll see someone at a conference face to face. I'll say, you should hop on the pod. You sound like you really know what you're talking about. They hop on the pod and then I see them at the next happy hour at the next industry conference, and leadership's like, how do you know that? How did you even get to, and it's just like the beauty of a podcast and sharing stories. So that's when it comes to like sales, I guess, like pipeline, what lots of people actually care about. What else can I touch upon? So I spoke
Yeah,
about relationships, thought leadership, expertise. What I also do with conferences that we have booths at is I offer the show organizers to hop on the pod and basically ask them like, tell them, hey, do you want to hop? And then we'll push it out on LinkedIn, and we have quite the following. And we can talk about the 5 things to expect at Vive 2024, which is a healthcare conference coming up. They ended up sharing that, the show organization, and they have like 30,000 people in there. And it's just great, like how it's just providing that stage and like elevating people. And I love that.
that's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah, and I mean, something you've mentioned a number of times, and it's funny because you don't think about it until you're kind of in it, but like having that backlog of guests for upcoming episodes, and it sounds to me like you're kind of always on the lookout. But what does that process kind of look like for you? Is it a situation where you've got this developed list of people that you want to bring on to the show, much like kind of talked about with your first one? I mean, that's just a wild story. Just get right up there in the line for the book signing and book your first guest. But that's something that a lot of shows kind of struggle with, to keep a consistent schedule of guests that are actually coming on to the show. How does that work on your end? What does your process look like?
Sure. So I have some peers from other companies that I work with, and they're always like, oh, my boss wants me to start a podcast. Where do I start? And my thing is actually 2 things. Number 1 is find that one anchor guest that from there you're just like golden. Like credibility is everything. We're in the world of just like the society, and like how you judge someone is like just who was the last person on your show. And that gives you like that, ooh, okay, I guess I should join as well, and creating that FOMO. So it's getting that one anchor guest who's like a star. And you could either go to your CEO and ask if they have anyone that they know, in their network. Go to one of your customers and say, we really want to. And the podcast is such a great platform to like, I guess, shine light on others' accomplishments. So like when there's a healthcare organization that's like leading this crazy digital innovative project, I'm like, I want to have you on and I want to have you talk about how X healthcare organization, your latest digital app that you just launched, like that's giving them, it's like a win-win because that's giving them a way to show off what they're doing, rightfully so. And we have some great content for other folks who are looking to do what this healthcare organization is doing. And they're seeing this name like Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Transformation Officer at healthcare organization. So it's getting that one anchor guest. Now, what I love to do, and this is a great trick to create community and basically maintain credibility, at the end of each episode, I say, we're all pioneering healthcare, not we, you, whoever my guest is. Who else would you like to nominate? So I use this nomination strategy. Who would you like to nominate that is making waves in the space that you think should hop onto the podcast to share their insights? These people have like 9 names that they can think of, and they're like, I could go on and on, but you should reach out to A, B, C, D, and it gets them really excited. I take that snippet when I have time, because honestly, I don't really have time lately to do this, but I take that snippet, I even do it with my phone, reach out to this nominee, on LinkedIn. I even have the subject line say like so and so it's a familiar name, so and so nominated you to be on our podcast. Right away, it doesn't look scammy. It doesn't look like a generic message. It really looks like hyper personalized and it's real. It's not like
Yeah.
something fake. And I say, they said such great things about you that you should talk about your expertise in blah, blah, blah. And I'd love to have you on. And it's just like, a win-win. So they usually respond very nicely and they're always ready to hop on. And that's how I keep this like nomination thing going. And it's been working really well.
I love that. I haven't heard that one yet, but I mean, it's a great way. I mean, you're getting a referral, essentially from somebody, but to your point, then when you're reaching out to, these guests or these potential guests, I mean, it is hyper personalized, right? It's not just something you're making up. It's you are reaching out to them for a specific reason and you
Right.
have the reason why it makes sense for them to potentially come on the show. And obviously for me as a podcaster, I mean, that would be exciting to also hear, hey, somebody, basically recommended me or thought that I would have some sort of value to bring to another show. And that's always,
Right.
that's one of the more rewarding parts of being in podcasting. You want to know that you're kind of bringing that value out. So I
Right.
love that strategy. That's amazing. I've not heard that one yet.
And one more tip just for people to learn from is I always like to keep it short. So don't send a whole paragraph about what your podcast is about. Do the research. Don't be lazy because it's just annoying to get a request to come on a podcast and you're just like, what's Patient Journey Pioneers? What do you want me to talk? What is this? These people are busy. Like, it's just like when you're getting a LinkedIn message in the middle of the day, you're dealing with like 1,000 emails, you're about to go into a meeting. Like, people just don't have time anymore, sadly, but that's just reality. I like to
Right.
spoon feed them with a very clear, short, concise message. So I'll start with the nominee aspect. You've been nominated, woohoo. And then I go into like, this won't be more than 30 minutes of your time front to end. I like to put that on the table so they don't think it's like, I don't know, 45-minute webinar that they now have to. And then I also do some research on like either their latest and greatest. What have they been doing? What can I help shed light on? So your recent project around your patient access app, for example. And then that immediately creates kind of like a more organized framework for them to be able to be like, okay, yeah, I'm on. Like once they know that you're leading and you're not kind of waiting for them to do their homework because they don't have time for that. So
Right.
it's better to really just spoon feed them with all the information.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if someone's going to come on your show, just make it as easy as possible, for them to have, a good experience and a good show as well, right? So I guess what's been the most rewarding part of kind of launching a podcast? I mean, I know you've had to kind of, do this on your own and this is, really becomes kind of your own baby, if you will. But what's been the most rewarding part of that?
I gotta say, and this is quite the shout out to one of my guests. Her name is Laura. She's from McKinsey, and I'm also a McKinsey alumni. So I just love that whole like personal bonding thing where it's like, I reach out. Yeah, usually they say yes, but to be like, oh, we were both at McKinsey, it's just like, oh, human to human connection, right? So she's still at McKinsey. She's an amazing consultant. She hopped on. We had a great show. It was like woman to woman kind of energies. She's this like super woman making waves in the space. And at the end, I always like to just like pick their brain on things. They really do become friends. And that's like the most rewarding part. It's these people are like top notch, in my opinion, smart, bright minds. I always like to ask them about like some life advice at the end of each episode, kind of let's get personal part. And what happened with Laura was, and this is rewarding like from personally and also professionally and for my organization. So Laura knows everything about digital health, right? And she's like up to date and we were building our largest booth in Hyro history at one of these upcoming healthcare conferences. And I was like thinking about our messaging. And I was like, hey, if I really want to nail down our booth messaging, why don't I just hit up one of my guests, like 15 minutes of their time and just like run it by them? These people are human beings. Like they want to help, especially if it's short, right? And you're not abusing their time. So I reach out to Laura. I send her this like wedding picture of mine with my dress and we just have this whole back and forth and I'm updating her on personal life. And then comes the time for the booth brainstorming and I'm like, do you think you have 10 minutes to just hop on a call where I could show you what we have planned for so-and-so conference? Because I really want to nail it and I want the messaging to like hit right with our ICPs. She's like, sure. And so we had a brainstorm session, which turned out to be 40 minutes. And she really helped us like sharpen it. And she basically like, I think she felt great to be part of like a startup's, process and like growing pains and kind of holding her hand through that. And the booth came to life. And I sent her a picture of like our 20 by 30 huge booth. And I was like, thanks for being part of the journey and like Patient Journey Pioneers, et cetera, et cetera. So it all worked out. And that was a nice experience.
That's awesome. So I guess on the flip side then, what's been sort of what's been the most difficult part of kind of being a solo caster? I mean, this is again something that you didn't expect to have to kind of do on your own. So what's been the hardest part of that?
Think it's keeping up with like the being in the trenches and the prep work that is asked of you before each episode. Like people really don't realize that you can't just hop on just like you are now. You had to read about me. I don't know, ask Justin what he understood that I was doing these days. Like there is work that is, and when you've committed to a timeline, here's another tip is commit to a realistic timeline for when you're publishing an episode. So don't make it once every week. That's like when you're become a pro and it's your full-time job. Ours is every 2 weeks, and it's still quite aggressive for me because I'm still managing our in-person events, virtual summits. The podcast is really just like a side thing. So it's keeping up with making sure you have the speakers lined up, but mainly, and I'm saying Motion did not pay me to say this, it's just the do-arounds around each episode to make sure that you've done everything from A to Z. Like, I wish I could just sit here, work my magic, record, send it off, have it repurposed, get a Google folder with all the assets I need. Unfortunately, although it's fine, but like, unfortunately, I'm still doing that myself. So the hardest thing is like just the keeping up with the demanding timeline. One way for those who are still solo and don't have Motion yet is I created this sub item plugin. Not I created, sorry. I installed a sub item template in Monday.com where every time I open up an episode, let's say I just recorded episode number 21, I choose a drop-down menu that's already been pre-populated with a templated like sub-item, boom, 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 boom. And once I click the podcast template, it kind of goes down into 12,000 sub-item tasks that I need to do, all the way to sending a thank you email. Like you'd be surprised when you're done recording and you just want to go into editing mode, you forget
Mhm.
to write that thank you email. And I really like to do that because it closes the loop. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's just so wild to see because I mean, we do work with a lot of people who are on these, like we mentioned at the top of this, these small scrappy teams where there's just so much that goes into podcasting that people don't even know about. And so it's just really cool for me to see, somebody who's actually gone through and kind of figured it out on their own. And not only that, but is kind of really flourished in the position. And I know there's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's not just the simple fact that you're trying to figure out, hey, well, how do I just make this work? I mean, you've made it work, and not only that, you're kind of perfecting the craft along the way. So this has absolutely been great. It's been interesting and wild for me to kind of hear your journey as we go through this conversation. But another question that I have based off of that is, obviously, so you're working in field marketing, right? So
Mhm.
I guess how has the podcast helped in your current role then?
Ooh, love that question. So number one, every single time there's like a target account, and I was able to get one of their champions or just one of their peeps from that account. I'm just like, company meeting. Yep, that lady was on my podcast, and that was one very friendly touch point that she just had with Hyro. So again, it's not like our goal is to be salesy on the podcast, but it's this indirect, elegant way to warm up these relationships for sales, to be honest and to be frank. What is the other value? Obviously, creating valuable content for listeners, and it's like subconsciously, puts Hyro as like the thought leader for conversational AI in healthcare. It's a win-win. So when you have these esteemed guests on the show, it like elevates our credibility, and it also positions them as superstars in the way that we promote is we have like a teaser audiogram come out on LinkedIn a week before the episode goes live. And it has like this really strong quote that they said with their headshot and their name and their job title. And it's wrapped really nicely in graphics. So again, that's where design really has a strong impact on your podcast success. It's like the thought put into the color scheme, the design, the icons, everything, the layout. Also, MOFU, TOFU, top of funnel, middle funnel. When we're speaking with an organization, it's fun to share with the sales team that, so and so already knows Hyro. I think I mentioned that already. But relationships, honestly, relationships is like the listens and the amount of downloads that Buzzsprout reports back to me, that comes secondary to the relationships that I've fostered on this podcast. And I am so happy, not even for myself. Like, I'm not here to self-brand. It really is for Hyro. I am so happy after each episode to just feel that I had a positive interaction with someone in the industry and that they now think of Hyro, at least in a good way. Like that that I feel is my contribution.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And so I guess kind of in that same vein, how has, being a podcast host helps you with like marketing messaging, your collateral, and I guess really kind of affected your overall job? I mean, I know you kind of mentioned how it positions Hyro kind of in people's, your prospects' minds or your customers' minds, but how has it really helped with, I guess that marketing messaging and collateral piece?
Messaging collateral piece. Again, I think it's that timeline of like offline and online and where they come together. So when I attend a physical conference and I see some of my pioneers slash guests, that's another thing, by the way. When you title your podcast, try to have it like, try to think ahead, like a year from now, when you're creating all this marketing around your podcast and its messaging, and people love puns and like witty aspects of marketing, and we're all like, everyone's like a smart consumer these days, and they like that like chuckle that they get from like smart marketing and witty. So I would choose like a title that you could play with afterwards. But that just got me sidetracked. So back to conferences. I hope this answers your question, but like I enjoy when we're sifting through the options of conferences for us to allocate our budgets to and to send people to, or even have a booth at. I like to see that there's already 2 to 3 or 4 people that have been on the podcast that I know I can just see there, foster the relationship, maybe even throw a client dinner or a podcast event of all my pioneers, maybe even have like a backdrop at the booth of like, I'm a pioneer with some like super Hyro, backdrop effect, and have them take a picture. I haven't gotten to that yet because ain't nobody got time for that, but these are just like ideas. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, yeah, no, it definitely does. And so Hyro and the healthcare industry overall, obviously both are complex, right? So what's it like hosting a podcast in a complex sector like AI, but also healthcare as well?
Right. So it's great, honestly, because it's a sector that's still a gray area. Everyone's talking about AI. It's no secret. And so on one hand, everyone's talking about AI, large language models, generative AI, digital innovation in healthcare, and there's so much meat on the bone there that I could extract for an episode. So it's great on one hand, but then healthcare specifically is a place with a lot of protocol, precautions, like dangers, stuff you have to take into consideration that other industries don't necessarily have to. This is literally sometimes matters of life and death and diseases, God forbid, and like giving false information, or what we like to call hallucinations, or lacking explainability of like why this AI assistant chatbot said something the way it did. Like there is no explainability behind that. And so with healthcare specifically, it's a very strict, slow moving, but rightfully so industry. And so making sense out of all of that and getting experts on stage to really discuss safety precautions, how to do it safely. Like this, we have an upcoming webinar on like the safe way to implement generative AI and ChatGPT in healthcare. So you asked about like what it's like to kind of be in that intersection. Well, it's great because you get to make sense out of gray areas and lead the way and kind of inform executives on how to go back to their organizations and say, okay, I'm doing this AI thing. I'm going to get ChatGPT in here, but we're going to do it safe. And Hyro, actually, I just heard a podcast about I don't know, how some other guy at this other healthcare organization is doing it right.
Yeah, and it's funny because the more that people talk about AI, or at least the more and more people talk about AI, there's a lot I can do. It's great, and there's so much benefit, and it's not going anywhere, right? And you've kind of mentioned that, but I think that a lot of times people have at least the hesitancies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they have around implementing it is just the simple fact that they don't really know kind of how to do it properly, which is exactly what you're talking about here. And I think that that's a huge benefit for people if they're able to work with somebody who can kind of give them idea of actually, hey, this is how you should actually implement AI within your own company. But
And
I
Hyro is actually, that's our value here, not to push Hyro into the spotlight right now, but that's not what we're talking about. But that's what Hyro really does. It's where the responsible way to go about implementing AI in your organization. Don't just put ChatGPT in there. It could go south. So we're the tool for that. And that's what we're trying to establish, but obviously have conversations around strategies and challenges and how these executives are facing them rather than saying what Hyro does.
Absolutely. So I guess, what kind of advice would you give to someone who is facing, little or no budget, but, still want to do,
Mm.
this initiative, that whole situation that you faced?
For sure. So I would have a lot of calls with people and just soak up information. I always love helping people who are like in the beginning part, just to like help them not fall into the holes that I fell into and just save them from those and save them time and just kind of tell them what I do and what works. But number one, I'd say define your purpose. So you can't just be like, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and let's see how it goes. Like you really need a goal. People know this already, but like, what is your unique opportunity that you can offer the world? Like, what do you specifically have? What niche can you place yourself in and provide valuable knowledge on that hasn't been done yet? I would definitely recommend to create a realistic and well-defined timeline. So I was at first like, I'm like, always trying to be like on it and just like work fast. And I was about to be like, all right, let's just do one episode a week and call it. And there's no way. Like, start with one episode every 3 weeks if you're starting, and then promise your audience more and more, but like as you get more of an oiled machine, because it's very hard, like getting that first one out. It also comes with the nerves of like, how do I sound? I've never done this before. So walk before you run and master it before you commit to a more aggressive timeline. Also surround yourself with like people who can help you. So like our designer, as I said, she made it a point to like have brainstorm sessions before we just like submitted artwork to Spotify and Apple and just called it a day. Like we had a lot of language around this, and the title Patient Journey Pioneers, and it sounds very like horizon looking. And so get that title down, surround yourself with creatives, stay organized. So open up a Google sheet and just start listing all the potential speakers or guests that you would want on your podcast. And, I'd guess get that anchor guest and have a script ready with questions. I even made a bank of questions. Like I listened to other podcasts, to be honest, and the questions that, stand out to me, and I say, ooh, that's really big conversation trigger. Like I would put that in my Google sheet called Healthcare Podcast Bank of Questions. And then when I have like someone coming up tomorrow and I haven't had time to prepare, there's always those ones that are winners, fill-ins. I guess give your podcast a one-liner that illustrates the main value that your audience will get. It's very easy to kind of get sidetracked. So like make sure you have this tagline. Like ours is like roadmaps for digital leaders in healthcare. There, boom. I know that it's roadmaps. I know that it's going to guide me. It's going to hold my hand through strategies and best practices. I know who it's for. It's for executives. I know where it's in healthcare. So try to get all those in. And then I'd say lastly, like, don't forget the goal. Be present when you are interviewing. Make sure that the conversation is real. So don't just sound like you're reading from a script of questions, but really listen. And there is an art of listening that I'm still trying to master. Try to go down a rabbit hole if you see that there's potential there, not just because question number 6 is on a totally different topic. You shouldn't just like bounce off to that. If they're saying something interesting, think of what you would want to hear as a listener and ask even more.
Absolutely. I love it. I mean, I feel like it's one of those things where I'm sure that this is not necessarily the position, or at least the way that you kind of, dreamed it all coming to fruition or kind of unfolding. But I mean, just kind of what you've learned from this whole experience has really been, I mean, it's incredible. It's been fascinating for me to kind of hear, but, I think that's kind of a good place to end. But, I guess where can people to go to learn more about, you and what you're doing at Hyro?
Sure. So LinkedIn, of course, just shoot me a DM, and I'd love to really like help if you're confused or just starting your way and you don't want to fall into those holes that I fell into and wasted a lot of my time and a lot of frustration. I'd love to save you from that. And maybe we could put together like frameworks that can help you. Whoever's out there and has been tasked with this difficult yet rewarding side job as part of your full-time position.
Absolutely. Well, Liat, thanks again. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. It was great having you on Recorded Content.
Thank you so much for having me. And hopefully one day I'll have motion to help
Absolutely.
me
Hey,
out.
we'd love it.
Sounds good.
And that's a wrap for this episode of Recorded Content. This show is produced by Motion, a full-service podcast agency that's all about working with B2B marketers. Starting a podcast is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Visit motionagency.io and get everything you need to launch and grow your customers' favorite show.